The UFC has been on fire lately, what with the promotion's 2016 sale to WMG Endeavor for $4 billion and subsequent $1.5 billion broadcast deal with ESPN. But before all that massive financial success, there was the very real possibility of complete failure. Following their purchase of the UFC in 2001 for $2 million, the Fertitta brothers sank over $40 million into the sport and had very little to show for it. Cable providers were pulling them from pay-per-view, buy rates were stagnant, and the sport looked like it was on its last legs. But a series of fights in the welterweight division between some of the best athletes to ever compete in the sport helped turn mixed martial arts into a massive phenomenon. Let's take a look at the intense rivalry between Matt Hughes, BJ Penn, and George St Pierre in the latest episode of Beef Wars. This three-way rivalry goes back, way back, to the start of the Zuffa era, before Twitter trash talk, before bombastic press conferences, before Ariel Helwani was interviewing fighters before every bout. All the way back to before the UFC even had a TV deal. In November of 2001, a country boy named Matt Hughes knocked out Carlos Newton with a slam to become just the third man to ever hold the UFC welterweight title. Over the next 3 years, he defended the 170-pound strap 5 times, tying Tito Ortiz at time for the most consecutive title defenses in UFC history. But unlike Ortiz, Hughes struggled to become a pay-per-view selling superstar. That lack of respect from the fans would start to change after the arrival of 2 hot new contenders to the division. BJ Penn's nickname, the Prodigy, was well earned after he won gold in the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Mundials at 19 years old with just 3 years of training. A year later, he'd skip the regional circuit and step right into the UFC for his first mixed martial arts fight, earning a TKO win at UFC 31. Penn quickly became the star attraction in the brand new 155-pound division, but a loss to Jens Pulver in his first lightweight title fight and a draw to Caio Uno in his second prevented him from earning the championship belt. With money tight and media traction focused on heavier weight classes, the UFC decided to shutter the lightweight division. Undaunted, Penn moved up to 170 pounds to challenge Matt Hughes for the welterweight title at UFC 46. Hughes, like many fans of the sport at the time, was shocked by Penn's audacity. "I remembered his belly aching after Jens kicked his butt, claiming he had actually won," Hughes wrote in his autobiography Made in America, "and now he was going up a weight class to take me on. Was this spoiled rich kid for real?" Matt did feel like it was disrespectful, Penn told the UFC years later. "Guys don't just come up from a lower weight class to try and kick the higher weight class guys from the top." "I didn't like him very much," BJ added. "I idolized him. I respected him. We were two different people. But I was walking out to fight him and I thought, this is it. You could really get hurt tonight. This guy is not a joke. He could really send you to the hospital." But Penn had been preparing, spending much of his training camp working with Team Quest and wrestling with greats like Matt Lindland and Randy Couture. BJ had already earned a reputation as an inconsistent fighter with questionable training discipline, but on January 31, 2004, he was dialed in. Meanwhile, Hughes later admitted he was burnt out from the stress of being champion for 4 years. He underestimated Penn and paid the price. Fighting off his back, Hughes ate a hard right from Penn late in the first that stunned him. Smelling blood, BJ quickly took Matt's back and submitted him with 21 seconds to go in the round, and with that, BJ Penn was suddenly the new UFC welterweight champion. That wasn't the only big wave hitting the welterweight division that night. UFC 46 also marked the debut of a young Canadian martial artist named George St Pierre, who would earn a decision victory over Karo Parisien on the unaired prelim portion of the card, but more on him later. Focus has always been an issue when it comes to BJ Penn's career. Rather than stay with the UFC and defend his new belt, Penn relinquished the title to fight for K1 in Japan, competing at middleweight and even openweight against a 225-pound Lyoto Machida. This opened the door back up for Matt Hughes to regain the top spot in the division, but it wouldn't be easy. Mixed martial arts was evolving rapidly, and Penn was just the first of several new breed fighters coming out of the woodwork. The UFC clearly saw George St Pierre as a potential star, an athletic freak with a clean-cut image and huge support from his home country of Canada. His third fight for the promotion would be against Hughes for the vacant welterweight title, and while Hughes was notorious for his farm boy strength, St Pierre was an absolutely shredded specimen of a human being, suspiciously so as far as many in the scene were concerned. "It's not the first time someone has said that to me," St Pierre told Full Contact Fighting regarding steroid allegations leading into his fight with Hughes. Even some of my sparring partners said, "Hey George, what do you take to be that strong? I think they don't believe what I say, but they are going to see. I am going to be tested when I fight Matt Hughes. I can't wait to piss in the bottle." While St Pierre passed every drug test during his career, he didn't manage to get past Matt Hughes at UFC 50 in October of 2004. While the young Canadian put on a strong performance that included a spinning back kick that visibly hurt Hughes, the veteran caught St Pierre in a sudden armbar off a sloppy Kimura attempt with just seconds left in the first round. There would be no passing of the torch tonight. Matt Hughes proved a country boy could survive. "I didn't want to fight Hughes at UFC 50, GSP admitted in a UFC interview years later. "For the entire camp I could not sleep. I was so anxious, so nervous that I could not sleep at night. I was like, Matt Hughes, oh shit, I am not ready." To me, Matt Hughes was this giant, the greatest of all time. He was so huge in my mind I could not imagine defeating him, but I felt like I had no choice but to take the title fight. Who turns down a title fight? They may never offer me another shot in my career if I say I don't want to fight for the belt, so I was forced to take a fight I felt for sure I could not win in my mind. George would bounce back by winning 4 fights in 2005, the same year The Ultimate Fighter aired on Spike TV, igniting mainstream American interest in the UFC. After years of the UFC struggling to sell 100,000 pay-per-views, a title eliminator between GSP and BJ Penn at UFC 58 on March of 2006 saw over 300,000 buys.
The toughest fight that I had was my first fight with BJ Penn. And I believe BJ Penn in his prime was probably the fighter that I fought was skill-wise the most skilled athlete, the most skilled martial artist that I ever fight. He was like the perfect fighter. He was good everywhere. He had very little weaknesses.
One weakness was Penn's conditioning. It was hard not to wonder about BJ's commitment to training when comparing his Buddha-esque physique to George St Pierre's. There were also plenty of stories about Penn's hard partying ways coming out of Hilo, Hawaii. Stories that included a 2005 arrest and conviction for assaulting a police officer outside of a nightclub. It's a question for the MMA history books. What heights could BJ Penn have hit had he remained focused and motivated in his training? We only know the answer to what happened, though. BJ Penn took George St Pierre to the edge of defeat in the first round of their UFC 58 fight, blooding his eye and breaking his nose. But the tide turned in the second and third round as St Pierre's cardio held up and BJ's did not. GSP would earn a split decision win and the chance to rematch Matt Hughes for the welterweight title. That was the original plan anyway. St Pierre would blow out his knee, opening the door for BJ Penn to step in for another shot at his former title. Hughes, coming off a villainous appearance on the second season of The Ultimate Fighter and a star-making win over legend Royce Gracie that sold 600,000 pay-per-view buys, was happy to accept the high-profile rematch and an opportunity to avenge his previous loss. The two would fight at UFC 63 on September 23, 2006. Penn came out hard and strong early, taking the first round off superior striking and grappling, and then nearly finishing Hughes off in the second with a reverse triangle armbar. Only the bell saved Hughes from tapping, but the wheels fell off for Penn. "From there, I pretty much didn't have nothing left after that," Penn said in a UFC interview years later. "Matt finally got to punch me in the face about 100 times for all the stuff I said." With his cardio sapped, BJ Penn ended up trapped in the crucifix position with Hughes raining down punches and elbows on him until the referee mercifully stopped the fight. Hughes had once again turned back an assault from the next generation and won his 7th title defense, a record-breaking achievement at the time. But 5 years after he first became welterweight champion, his time at the top was finally set to come to an end. Following the win, George St Pierre entered the cage and criticized Hughes, famously telling him, quote, "I'm not impressed with your performance." The usually respectful St Pierre was apparently still sore over comments made by Hughes when he was a guest on The Ultimate Fighter. "During the show, Matt Hughes was very arrogant," St Pierre said. "One day he said to me, in front of everybody with the cameras on, 'George, when are you going to stop avoiding me? Come see me and I'll show you how to get out of an armbar.' It was a joke and he was trying to be funny, but nobody laughed, and it wasn't a nice thing to say. That wasn't something that a gentleman would say, not something I'd ever say." But the polite Canadian couldn't help but eventually apologize. Quote, It's not my style to go in there and say things, and it was very low class on my part to go there and ruin his celebration victory. I thought he was talking smack about me. This episode of Beef Wars was so gosh darn beefy that we had to split it up into 2 parts. So, look out for part 2 at a later date, and in the meantime, let us know in the comments section, where do you think GSP, Matt Hughes, and BJ Penn rank among the top 5 welterweights of all time, and who else makes the cut on your list? If you enjoyed the video, the best way you can help us is by hitting like, subscribe, and tapping that notification bell for more MMA goodness just like this, and most importantly, stay safe. St Pierre returned from his injury to face Hughes for the title at UFC 60